Well, listen, it is that time again. That's right. It's that time for us to have relationship empowerment. Listen, I am glad to be here with you today. I hope that you are excited about being here today. And because, listen, we are in this space and place to be able to make things happen. Listen, I'm looking forward to you not only being able to engage in what's happening today, not only for you to be able to ask questions if you want to ask questions today, but listen, I'm looking forward to you being able to also, that's right, bring your people with you. That's right, bring your people with you. If you're here on our YouTube channel, I'm asking you to share the link. Listen, if you're here with us on Facebook, I'm asking you to start a watch party, to be able to share this to your page. That's right. Listen, we know that because we're in relationships, that we can't do this alone. It does us no good if one of us are getting the information and the other person isn't getting the information. Why? Because we want to make sure that we're operating from the same sheet of music. It's good if one gets healthy, that the other party would get healthy also. And so I'm excited about you being able to bring those persons right here to this space and place so that we can be able to empower your relationships. I don't care what kind they are, family, romantic, friendships, professionals. Listen, the nuggets that we'll share today, the principles that we will uncover, listen, they will address relationships across the board. That's right, across the board. And so, listen, I am excited about today, and I'm looking forward to what it is that we're going to delve into right now. So, listen, if you're on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe, hit that bell icon so you can get the notifications. If you're here with us on the LifeEmpowermentCh page, I'm asking that you like the page, that you follow the page, and listen, we're here to be able to empower you and to empower others. Help us to empower them now as we share what is happening at this time. And so, listen, let us go ahead and begin to delve right into our teaching for today. Now, listen, we're talking about dangerous expectations in relationships. That's right. Listen, we're talking about dangerous expectations in relationships. That's right. So, listen, this is part 2. If you have missed part 1, don't worry about it. Part 1 is on our Facebook page, it's on our YouTube channel. And so if you miss out on that part, you can go back and listen to it. But let us go ahead and tune in for today. And so listen, I'm excited about today. I am looking forward to what is going to transpire in this time and in this moment. So listen, as you know, it is always our custom to start with a scripture passage that really speaks to the issue that we're discussing at the moment. And so here in Proverbs 13:12, looking at the Amplified Bible, here's what it says. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when desire is fulfilled, it is a tree of life. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when desire is fulfilled, it is a tree of life. One of the things we talked about last week, and it's worth reiterating again, is that when we look at this word hope, that word hope can be translated in updated terms as expectation. And that word deferred can be interpreted as not met. So one of the things that we tried to do to make this very digestible and to really make it applicable was to really kind of modernize this text so that we understood what it says as it relates to dangerous expectations. And so I'm just going to read it the way that we translated it last week. And so here's what we are saying. Expectations not met makes the heart or the mind, the will, and the emotions sick. sick by affliction, sick by grief, sick by disease. But when expectations are met, or when the expectation is met, there is life, there is joy, and fulfillment. And we translated that even in a little more simpler terms. And we said it this way: not getting what you want can make you feel sick, but a wish that comes true is a life-giving tree. And so listen, here's what I want you to know, that expectations, all of us have them. The question is, with our expectations, are they realistic? Are they realistic? Listen, are your expectations realistic? Are my expectations realistic? I'm sure that you came to listen today, to tune in today. You came with some expectations. And so we really need to understand, when we're talking about expectations in relationships, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves: are our expectations realistic? The reality is that we're all born with expectations, but simply because we have expectations doesn't necessarily mean that our expectations are realistic. That's right. Listen, simply because you have them does not necessarily make them legit. Simply because you desire something to happen in the relationship doesn't necessarily make it legit for the relationship. It's legit to you, but is it legit for the relationship? See, hope is the expectations that good things will happen in the future. And so there's no way for me to be in any relationship without having hope, which therefore means without having expectation. And therefore, this is why every expectation that you and I encounter, any expectation that you and I dive into, you and I are going to have expectations. The question is, are those expectations realistic? And so here's the question: do you know the difference for your own expectations, not to mention the relationship expectations? That's right. Listen, when you and I are in relationship, we bring a certain level of expectations itself. But also with those expectations that we bring to the relationship itself carries a certain amount of expectations. That's right. Listen, your professional relationships carry a certain amount of expectation. Your friendships carry a certain amount of expectation. Your spiritual relationships carry a certain weight of expectations with it. And so this is why within the midst of all of our relationships, there is nothing but expectations in the midst of it. But here's something that we looked at last week, and we'll look at it every week, because I believe that it's one of those pillars that we have to constantly kind of carve out and look at and reassess and reexamine. And as you look on the screen behind me, it says, unexamined expectations are the seeds of trouble and conflict. Notice it didn't say expectations are the seeds of trouble and conflict. It's unexamined expectations are the seeds of trouble and conflict. See, the reality is all of us are allured by this attractive notion that effortless relationships exist. I don't care what kind of relationship you may have. Obviously, there are times that we kind of fall into what we may call magical thinking. We may call unrealistic thinking. And so we begin to think that there's somehow, especially in a romantic relationship, if it's something that's really called into existence, or maybe a good friendship, if this is something that's really meant to be, it should be effortless. It's kind of the mythical thinking that we have. But I would tell you that there's no such thing as an effortless relationship. I don't care how much it is ordained by God. I don't care how much you have so many different things in common. I don't care how many different things that you all share as common, shared experiences. There is going to be work in any relationship. But when we don't really address this kind of idea that effortless relationship exists, we don't really begin to dive into these expectations that we have. And so therefore, we don't really begin to examine them. And so therefore, we begin to come up with these conclusions that, well, marriage should go this way. Friendship should go this way. Professional relationship should go this way. And therefore, when they don't go the way that we say that they should go, we think something's wrong with the other person. We think something's wrong with the relationship. And there could be several factors that fall into that equation. But today we're talking about the expectations. And so therefore, there may be some unexamined expectations that are affecting even good, wholesome relationships, whether they're marriages, whether they're friendships, whether they're spiritual relationships, church relationships. Doesn't matter what category they fall under. If we don't examine our expectations, those are seeds. Notice they're seeds, but seeds grow into trees, seeds grow into plants, seeds begin to have fruit on the limbs. Listen, you could be very well growing a seed of unexamined expectations that blossom into an oak tree. Listen, it can blossom into a whole forest. And you're just filled with unexamined expectations that begin to just ruin all kinds of relationships simply because we haven't taken time out to examine the relationships that, or the expectations that we have. And so remember, expectations not met, going back to the passage where we started, expectations not met make the mind, the will, and the emotions sick. Sick how? Afflicted, sick with grief, sick with disease. But when the expectation is met, there is life, joy, and fulfillment. Now, let me also remind you that if at any point you have a question about what it is that we're discussing, listen, please be sure to put it on the comment section here on YouTube. Put it on the comment section here on Facebook page so that I might see it, be able to answer it in real time. So let us look here today. Well, last week we were talking about these idealistic expectations and understanding what does that look like. Today I want to talk to you about unrealistic expectations and what does that look like. Unrealistic expectations. So listen, let me define it this way. Unrealistic expectations are non-communicated requests and or non-agreed upon requests. Now let me say that again. Unrealistic expectations are defined this way. They're non-communicated requests and or non-agreed upon requests. So when we understand this first portion, that the non-communicated requests, we have to begin to ask ourselves, what do we expect from ourselves and the other person involved in the relationship? What is it that we are expecting? Are we even clear for ourselves about what it is that we're expecting? How many times is it that we sometimes say something as common as, I want to have something to eat, but I really don't know what I want. So here I have an expectation that I really don't have clarity around. I know that I want something, but I really don't know exactly what it is that I want. And that's just a small snapshot of what happens in relationships. And so it's like, well, this isn't working well, but I don't really know what's going wrong. This situation didn't turn out the way I expected, but I really don't know where it dropped. And so what happens is that we have these expectations, but we're not really clear about them. And when you're not clear about the expectations, let me tell you, it's a mist in your head. But in the relationship, it's a full-blown fog. And therefore, you are putting out these expectations that have no clarity. And then when something goes wrong, if you're not careful, you'll blame the relationship, you'll blame the other person, because we don't really understand how to get to the root of where the problem lies. So not only when we talk about unrealistic expectations, do we have to ask ourselves, how much clarity do we have about the expectation ourselves? Not about the relationship, not about the other person, but just simply ourselves. The next question that we have to ask ourselves when we're talking about unrealistic expectations in a relationship is, how do we communicate these expectations to the other person or persons in the relationship? Listen, I can't tell you how many times I've seen this happen, sometimes even with myself. Now, listen, we have these expectations, but we haven't communicated them. Now, I am a person that I'm a visual thinker. And so, therefore, I think in images, and I think in picture frames. And I can tell you that there have been times with my wife, with my children, with other persons, I saw the conversation, I visualized the conversation, and because I was so into the visualization, I thought I had said something. I thought that the other person had the same information I had. I can just tell you, just here recently, my wife and I were talking, and she had told me about this particular appointment that was happening with our daughter, and she said, "Can you take her?" Now, I thought, as I'm looking at me execute on this request, that this was going to happen at 7 p.m. Now, we never discussed 7 a.m. or 7 p.m., but when she said 7, I thought 7 p.m. It was on a Wednesday. I'm thinking, okay, the person who's going to do her hair is going to work. My daughter has school. I'm thinking about all these different things that are occurring, and so therefore, I'm thinking 7 p.m. Now, I never said it, never communicated, but I was convinced, so much so that when the next morning arose and I had overslept a little for the time that I usually wake up, and my daughter comes in the room, is like, "Dad, we're running late." And I'm like, "Running late to what?" And she was like, "I'm supposed to be at the hairdresser by 7 a.m. And I said, "No, that's 7 p.m. And here's where the problem happened. The problem happened because I didn't know that next day was a holiday and that my daughter didn't have school. The person who was doing her hair wasn't going to work. And therefore, I had 7 p.m. simply because my expectation about the execution of this was 7 p.m. My wife's expectation was 7 a.m. There was missing information in the gap. But when it was time to execute, the problem was that we didn't have clear communication on the expectation. And I'm saying that as much as that happened in a small segment, listen, that happens often in big segments. We have big expectations. We have big desires. We have big things that we're looking to happen in a relationship. And the higher the expectation, the bigger the fall when that thing doesn't happen. And remember, expectations, remember where we started with our passage. Now, listen, expectations not met makes the mind, the will, and the emotions sick, afflicted, grieved, and diseased. And so, listen, this is why I want you to understand that when we're talking about relationship empowerment, we're talking here today about unrealistic expectations, that you and I have to begin to examine when we have these expectations. Do I have clarity with my own expectations? Do I have communication clarity with those that I have this expectation that they are going to help fulfill? And so this is why you and I have to begin to ask ourselves those questions first before we even talk about the other person. Now, once again, if you have questions, once again, listen, you can put it right on the Life Empowerment Church page or our YouTube channel. I will see that and be able to address it. So here, after we've clarified whether or not our expectations are clear to ourselves, and then asking ourselves, have we communicated with clarity to the other person? whether or not they have understood our expectations. The next thing is that we've got to ask ourselves and ask the other person, have they agreed to our expectation? Because simply because they heard it doesn't necessarily mean that they have agreed to it. How many times is it that, listen, we've communicated something thinking that the person was listening, thinking that the person understood, and therefore we thought, okay, they're in agreement. When in all honesty, that is not their agreement. And sometimes we assume these things, and because we've assumed these things, they create all kinds of turmoil for our relationship. And so this is why it reminds me of this one story where this lady was talking about how she listened to a friend's problems for years. She was always listening to what a friend was going through, was just giving just a real listening ear. Even though it was very difficult for her at times to give that listening ear, she did it because she knew that her friend expected that from her. However, when it was switched and it was now time for the friend that was listening to now share with the other person different issues, and that person did not feel as comfortable and as safe to share with that person, the person became upset because they thought, well, how is it that, you would allow me to share with you, but you won't share with me? And because there was that sort of impasse, it really created a kind of deterioration in their relationship because the other person had an expectation that the other person never had, the person one never communicated to, the person never agreed to it. And sometimes, going back to our passage, the reason why we are sick in our emotions, the reason why we are afflicted in our mind, sometimes the reason why we have all these kind of inner turmoil is because the person never agreed to what it is that you were expecting. Now, I know that may be tough to digest, that may be tough to hear, that may be tough to realize, but the reality is, listen, you can save yourself a lot of inner pain by assuring that before you put your expectations out there, that the person has already understood and the person has agreed. I'm telling you, it will save yourself a lot of pain and a lot of heartache, and save your heart from being broken. I'm telling you, I've been there, done that, and listen, got the t-shirt to prove it. So listen, so here, but here's the reality. We also talk about unrealistic expectations. Sometimes we don't know that we had an expectation until the opportunity presents itself, and now it has been revealed. Sometimes you can be in a situation to where maybe this is an experience that you've had, and because you've had this experience for a long time, you just automatically expect that, hey, when I go to this restaurant, because this has been my experience, that, hey, this is what they're going to do because this is what I'm used to them doing. I haven't checked to see whether or not anything has changed. I haven't clarified whether or not this expectation that I have is even still the expectations that they are willing to live up to. And therefore, I am setting myself up for failure because I'm walking into a situation and I don't even know that this is the expectation I have. And listen, it happens to the best of us. When something like that happens, that's okay. I just have to be able to call myself on it. See, when I don't call myself on it and I'm thinking that somebody else is at fault, somebody else is responsible because I had an expectation that wasn't communicated, wasn't agreed upon, this is when I'm setting things up for failure. This is when I'm setting things up for problems. Why? Because in that moment now I'm blaming them for something I can't even hold them accountable to because it wasn't communicated. It wasn't agreed upon. Now, this may hurt. Don't get me wrong. This may be painful, but it doesn't mean that somebody else is to blame. It means that I've got to check myself And I've got to be able to look at me so that I can deal with what I have set myself up for, not what somebody else had done unexpectedly. See, listen, conflicts cause unexpressed expectations. Listen, conflicts caused by unexpressed expectations are very common. Unmet expectations can lead to great disappointment and frustration in our relationships. See, some of the conflicts that we're having in our relationships, listen, I don't care whether there are, listen, parent to child. It can be, like I said, marriages. It can be dating relationships. It can be church relationships. Listen, this goes across the board. This is universal. And there are times in which we have conflicts that are caused by these unexpressed expectations. I can't tell you how many times, listen, I came out of the world into the church. My wife was born, listen, on the pews of the church. And there are times in which we've gone to minister at churches, and they maybe had a traditional practice I was not aware of. Nobody had kind of communicated that to me. And so I go in, and my wife had said, you know what? I think they may have been a little offended because you didn't do X, Y, and Z. These are certain traditions that are expected that you would do. And I was like, I didn't know that. And so we learned over time that she would kind of inform me. Sometimes we would even have these conversations going to the church. Hey, is there anything I need to know? Anything that I maybe have overlooked? And so we've learned that, but I'm saying in the relationship itself, it wasn't that the church communicated that. It wasn't like the person who I was speaking to that was the representative. It's an assumption that this should have already been known. And I'm telling you, that's the breeding ground for conflict. But when we don't know this, it's easy to think or assume that the other person should have known, they were supposed to know. I don't know how they were supposed to know, but we think that they were supposed to know. We even say things, well, that's common sense. But do you know that common sense is nothing more than common knowledge? And if the knowledge that you have is not common according to what you've been exposed to, then it won't be common sense to you. And it won't be common sense to the other person. And sometimes that's where we set ourselves up. We set the relationship up for failure. And according to the passage that we read, listen, it can be heartache. Listen, it can be much affliction. And I'm telling you that it can be something small, but it can be something major, depending upon the nature of that exchange. I give you another example. You're going to the store, and somebody was cooking something, and they were like, hey, can you go get some cheese? And you go get the cheese, but you were thinking block cheese. They're thinking shredded cheese. You're thinking cheddar. They're thinking mozzarella. And because the moment of, hey, we're cooking a bit dinner, we're cooking it for a special occasion, and you brought home the wrong stuff, listen, that can create a major friction simply because we did not have clarity on the expectation. We didn't have communication clarity on the expectation. And we set ourselves up for failure. See, one of the great clues, here, let me tell you this. One of the great clues to let you and I know when we have fallen into this unexamined expectation, unrealistic possible expectation, is when we find ourselves in disappointment. Let me tell you, when you find yourselves in disappointment, you've got to slow down, and instead of looking outward at, okay, who's at fault? What did you do? What did you not do? How did you not follow through? Before you look outward, you got to look inward. And let me tell you, this is a really mature component. Because listen, when you are emotionally enraged, it's hard to pull back and to look at yourself. Listen, when you are emotionally extremely frustrated, It's hard to pull back and look at yourself. But I'm telling you that in order to become mature and to save face, save your relationship, you've got to be able to pull back when you find yourself disappointed, when you find yourself frustrated, and be able to take a minute out and to ask yourself, what was I expecting? Was what I was expecting clear to me? And then I have to ask myself, was that expectation clearly communicated to the other person or persons? If I do not take that moment and I begin to act out of my frustration, I begin to act out of my emotional rage, I'm telling you, there are going to be times, maybe not all the time, but there are going to be times you're going to regret what you've said. You're going to regret how you acted. You're going to regret things that you communicated simply because you recognize after the storm is over, after the fire has gone out and the smoke is clear, that the problem is that you weren't really clear for yourself and you really didn't have clear communication with the other person, or the other person or persons never agreed to what it is that you thought they should have done. You thought they should have known. You thought that they should have carried through. I can remember going back to college, living in the dorms, having a roommate. And the reality is that they came from a whole different background. They came from a whole different family. They came from different upbringings. They came from a whole nother kind of dynamic. And so values and expectations and ways of living that I had, I thought, well, hey, this person would have the same thing. And I would come back and the room is dirty. I mean, I don't live that way, you know. And I'm like, what in the world are you doing? How do you live like this? And the reality was, we never had a conversation about what were our expectations, about how the room should be kept, where were we going to, how we were going to deal with certain just kind of everyday living situations. I had one roommate, listen, he used to love to listen to music when he studied. And for him, which I never really understood, I understood it because he told me, but I never understood it logically. He needed noise to help him to focus. I needed quietness to focus. And I couldn't understand why we've been in the room studying. He's turning to me like, man, I can't study with all this. And one of the resolves was that, hey, there'd be times he would study in the room. There'd be times I would study in the room. But we couldn't study in the room together. But listen, we didn't know that until there was conflict, until there was friction. And I'm telling you, unexamined expectations are the seeds of conflict. And so when you find yourself upset with an expectation, the first thing that you've got to be able to do is to ask yourself, was I clear for me? Was I clear to them? And did we have agreement with this expectation? See, listen. Here's another indication. When you find that you're nitpicking, you're nagging, you're criticizing, when you find that these are the kind of things that you're doing, maybe even withdrawing, you need to stop and to ask yourself, what's really happening with me and these expectations? Because these are the kind of ways that your emotions will speak. These are the kind of ways that your mind will speak. You're trying to deal with something that is creating inner turmoil, maybe not always communicating it, or maybe we're lashing out because it's like if it's on my mind, I'm just saying it without a filter. And I'm creating havoc in these relationships that are meaningful, these relationships that are important, these relationships that have significance. Listen, sometimes you have to reflect for a while on the effects of these actions, because these are the kind of things that can cause you to be counterproductive. At the end of the day, you're trying to get some kind of negotiation so that these expectations that you have will be things that actually work out. But if you're not creating the kind of atmosphere that creates the kind of engagement for discussion, the kind of engagement for conflict resolution, then what happens is that we're pushing people away. And we're upset that they're not willing to hear, they're not willing to listen, they're not willing to even come halfway, maybe. And that's simply because how we are reacting to our expectations not being met. It's not creating an environment for us to be able to have resolve, for us to have communication, for us to be able to move forward. And it's simply because, listen, you cannot violate this principle and expect your relationship to thrive. It is understanding that this is the kind of examinations that we have to have with our expectations in order for us to move forward. Now, I'm going to cover another point, and then we will bring it to close for today. I'm looking to see if anybody has any questions here on Facebook or on YouTube. I don't see anything, so I'm going to keep going. Now, last week we were talking about how expectations are developed. We talked about this. And one of the ones that we talked about was the family of origin. Once again, if you missed that, you can go back to Facebook or YouTube, and you can see that teaching that we did on last week about family of origin and how that impacts our relationships and expectations that we develop. This next one I want to talk about is previous, notice now, previous relationships. Previous relationships can set ourselves up for unrealistic expectations. That's right, listen, previous relationships. And here's what I have found that happens. When we have been in relationships that have gone south, relationships that didn't work out, especially ones that left some residue of pain, it left some residue of some kind of heartache. Now, it can be minor or it could be major, but the fact is that it just didn't have the kind of peace resolve to it. And even then, I would say that what I'm getting ready to say may even be something that you have to look into. Because sometimes when we have previous relationships in a particular area and now we go into another relationship with that previous relationship in the background. So you talk about I was married, divorced, and now I'm getting ready to be married again. You know, I had a good friend. I had a best friend. Something happened. Something went wrong. And now I'm starting to enter into another close relationship with somebody else. And I'm having some of these old memories. Sometimes it can be bad dating relationships. And so here's what I'm saying, that previous relationships can sometimes affect our expectations, because here's the reality. We haven't taken time to really process the pain of what happened. That's right, listen. Sometimes we don't want to go there. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. The last thing I want to do is look back and look into that. I'm trying to move forward. And I'm telling you that sometimes, because we haven't processed the pain of what happened, we don't really look at what went wrong and why. Why did this go wrong? What were there some red flags that I missed? Were there some things about me that I didn't understand? Were there some things about me that I failed to really address? And so I was part of what co-created. I was a co-creator and what went wrong. But sometimes in the midst of the pain, it's easy to point fingers at everything else and everyone else and the other person. But as that begins to fade, the smoke of that pain, and I really begin to get down to what is igniting that pain, I begin to recognize what were some of the issues. And therefore, this is why you've got to help understand yourself better by being able to take the time to process the pain a previous relationship. Listen, if you were in a professional relationship, you were fired from a job, or, you know what I mean, things just went havoc on the job. Listen, you got to process that. Because if not, listen, you'll take that, we call it baggage. You'll take that baggage with you in the next relationship, and it will taint expectations. It will contaminate the interactions. And so you've got to be able to really look at that. Not just move. See, we're often quick to rush. I just want to get over. I just want to get through it. I just want to get it behind me. And it's one thing to move forward. It's another thing to have progress. See, I can move forward into another relationship and act like I've made progress, but listen, I'm still carrying the weight and the pain of what happened, and if I don't deal with that, I promise you, you're going to take it into the next relationship. And now this other person is having to deal with things that they shouldn't be responsible for. They're having to address things that they're not responsible for. And therefore, you're creating more of a problem than a solution. Once again, listen, if you are having any questions about what it is that we're discussing, please be sure put that on the comments section here on Facebook or on YouTube channel. Here's the other thing that I would tell you when it comes to previous relationships as it relates to our expectations. And listen, this can happen with you raising kids. You can be like, well, look, my first kid was this way. I didn't expect my second kid to be this way. I can't tell you, listen. For those of you that don't know my story, listen, I was a wild child before I gave my life to Christ. A wild child. And my mom says that, listen, when you came along, you were nothing like your brother. I mean, like I had to change the entire map on how to raise you. And so I'm just telling you that these expectations can show up in a variety of ways. Second thing, when we talk about previous relationships and how they affect our expectations, sometimes we don't reflect on what didn't work in the relationship. Because, see, sometimes we leave relationships that was like, okay, you know, the season, the time, you know, we moved on. But if we don't really reflect on what didn't work, it's easy, listen, it's easy to miss red flags. It's easy to have a good closure so that you can have a good beginning. Because if I don't really come to some understanding of some things that relationship showed me about myself, then I promise you, I probably will make the same mistake again because I really haven't dealt with what really went wrong and why. And so, listen, you can use this to make yourself better and to make your relationships better by looking back at previous relationships. But usually the reasons why we don't do this is because we haven't really grieved. We haven't really dealt with the sadness. And because we haven't really dealt with that, we haven't really moved past the first layer into the next layers, because it is in dealing with the sadness and dealing with the grief, it's in dealing with the loss that I can begin to look a little further and to find out, okay, here were some things that came up, and this is why this didn't work. Now, listen, that is, So listen, we're out of time for today. We're going to continue this even more on next week as we continue this looking at dangerous expectations in relationships. That's right, listen, dangerous expectations in relationships. Because I would tell you, when you do the research, when you look at, and when I say research, that the research that have studied relationships across the board, you constantly see that these unexamined, unrealistic expectations just eat away at good relationships. It just eat away at it. And so this is why I want you to be able to know how to have the kind of relationship that brings fulfillment, it brings joy, it brings life to your life, because we examine them and we examine our expectations to see whether or not are they clear for us. Am I clear about what it is that I'm expecting? Or am I kind of somewhat blurry about it? I promise you, if you're blurry, if it's a mist in your head, it's going to be a fog in somebody else's. So I got to examine my expectations to see if they're clear. Then I have to make sure that my expectations are clearly communicated. Did I clearly communicate to the other person so that they understood what my expectation looked like? And then number 3, I've got to look at, did they agree to them? See, if they didn't agree to them, then I put myself in jeopardy of expecting something that the other person is not going to fulfill. And so listen, so as we have been here today talking about expectations, dangerous expectations, listen, I hope that this has been a real blessing to you. I pray that you have really gotten something out of this. I'm looking to see if there are any questions. I don't see any questions here on YouTube or on Facebook, which is fine. It's not that you have to ask questions, but we give the opportunity for you to be able to have as much clarity as possible regarding this. I had some more material for us to cover, but we will pick that up next week. And so listen, so I just want you to know that, listen, whether you're looking to improve a love relationship, a familial or family relationship, friendships, employee or employer relationships, understanding your expectations will bring a new dynamic to the situation. And so listen, I thank you for being here today with Ruffin It. I thank you for spending your time. And I hope that, listen, even after this is over, you can share this. You can send this to somebody, especially those that you're in relationship with. They need to have the same clarity so that you can have a better, fulfilling relationship. And so, listen, I ask that if you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to hit that bell notification symbol so that you can get notifications. I'm asking that if you're on our Life Empowerment Church page, to like our page, follow us, because listen, we're going to be empowering you again next Thursday as we talk about relationship empowerment. Now, here's the other thing I would say to you. Now, listen, if you believe that this has been a blessing to you, this is brought to you by Life Empowerment Church. And so I ask that you support Life Empowerment Church. And so you can do that by giving a donation here to Life Empowerment Church. And so listen, here's a few ways that you can do that. You can do that through our Cash App. So if you like to give digitally, you can do it through our Cash App. You could also do it through our PayPal account. LEC at let-god.org is our PayPal account. Listen, if you want to go to our website, you can go to our website and you can actually give online there. Listen, I also want to let you know that, listen, you can also send in a money order or check to Life Empowerment Church. And so our address is there on the screen. And so I pray that, listen, not only has this been a blessing to you, but listen, that you would turn around and be a blessing to Life Empowerment Church. Listen, I want you to know that, listen, we'll be here tomorrow with noonday prayer with Pastor LaTerra. My wife, she'll be leading this cause. And so, listen, we encourage you to be sure to be here 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for noonday prayer. It's going to be a great time, as it always is. And listen, I just want to remind you that, listen, this is Ruffin It. And here's what we do at Ruffin It. We empower your relationships. Chris Carolina, you are very welcome. And I hope that any and everybody that watches this, whether live or on the rebroadcast, that it blesses you, empowers your relationship, strengthens your relationship, so that you can have the kind of fulfillment that relationships were designed to bring. Listen, you be blessed, and I look forward to seeing you again here at Ruffin It, Relationship Empowerment. God bless you.